Welcome to meeting number 72 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I need to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. With regard to interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I should have all of that memorized by now. All right, just a new reminder. They always put something in here. I ask that all of the participants be careful when you're handling your earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on, in order to prevent feedback. Feedback can be extremely harmful to the interpreters and cause serious injuries. I invite the participants to only speak into their microphone that their earpiece is plugged into, and to place earpieces on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. Okay. Now, a reminder that all comments need to be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and thank you for your patience and understanding. Please also note during the meeting it's not permitted to take pictures in the room or screenshots on Zoom. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Monday, May 29, 2023, and Monday, June 12, 2023, the committee is continuing its study of impacts of the underused housing tax on Canadian border communities. And with us today, we have from the Canada Revenue Agency, and thank you very much for coming and providing us with this information. Aden Khan, Director General, Business Returns Directorate, Assessment Benefit and Service Branch. Louisa Rizzo, Director General, GST HST Rulings Directorate, Legislative Policy and Regulatory Affairs Branch. Jason Sharon, Director General, Small and Medium Enterprises Directorate, Compliance Programs Branch. Alexander Lawton, Director, Non-Residence Compliance Division, Compliance Programs Branch. And Jeff Truman, Special Advisor to the Commissioner of the Canada Revenue Agency. I welcome you all. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with questions. Mr. Khan, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, thank you for the invitation to be here today to participate in the committee's study of the impacts of the underused housing tax on Canadian border communities. My name is Adnan Khan, and I'm the Director General of the Business Return Directorates in Assessment, Benefit and Service Branch of the Canada Revenue Agency, CRA. My directorate is responsible for the development and processing of various business returns and elections, including the underused housing tax return and related elections. With me here today are my colleagues, Mr. Jeff Truman, Special Advisor to the Commissioner of Revenue, on behalf of the Legislative Policy and Regulatory Affairs Branch at CRA. Mr. Truman will speak to the interpretation of tax legislation, including the underused housing tax. The Legislative Policy and Regulatory Affairs Branch is the CRA's interface with the Department of Finance and coordinates proposals for legislative changes within the CRA. Ms. Louisa Rizzo, Director General of the GST HST Rulings Directorate. Her directorate is responsible for providing the CRA's official position on the interpretation of the Underused Housing Tax Act. This service is provided nationally to clients by responding to written requests for rulings and interpretation, and by publishing technical publications. The directorate's clients include individuals, businesses, tax professionals, and other CRA branches. Mr. Jason Sharon, Director General of Small and Medium Enterprises Directorate in our Compliance Program Branch. His directorate is responsible for developing and deploying intervention strategies to encourage, assist, and enforce tax compliance with respect to the underused housing tax, among other responsibilities. and Alexander Lawton, Director, Non-Resident Compliance Division of Compliance Program Branch. As you know, the Department of Finance is responsible for the development of tax policy, in this case, the development of underused housing tax, while the CRA is responsible for the administration of the Underused Housing Tax Act. My colleagues and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. All right, we will go on to our members. Up to 6 minutes. Mr. Baldinelli, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank our officials for being with us today. Thank you for your time. And as you probably are aware, this underutilized housing tax or underused housing tax is a huge issue in my community in Fort Erie. We have about 900 American residents, according to the mayor. U.S. Congressman Brian Higgins has indicated that he did a survey. He's been contacted by about 400 individuals, a survey of about 162 residents. 50% of them or more have owned residences in that community for 50 years or more. And the implementation of this tax, for example, as Mr. Khan, as you had mentioned, Finance had developed it, and they undertook their consultations during the election period of 2021. And when I asked the question, how many residents in Niagara have you heard from? And the response was 0. Well, just because of these hearings, we've had 150 submissions right now with regards to the tax. I mean, the U.S. Trade Representative met with the International Trade Minister in May and actually specifically referenced the underused housing tax and the concerns at the American government. I mean, Mr. Higgins has said he wants to avoid a situation, a race to the bottom, but he's prepared to introduce legislation in the United States and the impact that we could have, that could have to Canadian snowbirds. And I don't want to get to that situation. I want to get to a resolution. There's a solution to be found to the concerns that are being brought forward. And I was just wondering, based on the consultations, based on the U.S. Trade Representative bringing forward the concerns, has the minister directed you to look into the fact of additional changes that could be made or put forward to address some of the concerns, primarily in the rural communities such as Fort Erie?
So ever since we ruled out the underused housing tax and put out the information on our website, we have been engaged, we continue to be engaged with various stakeholders outside of the agency, and that, by the way, does include the feedback that we've been getting from taxpayer, either through our contact center or through our outreach to industry, including, for example, Canadian small and medium businesses, CPA Canada, but I'll let my colleague provide more details.
Thank you. So as you highlight the situation of U.S. residents holding a property in Canada, and that was understood, in fact, in designing the tax. Part of it, I understand, the work on the part of our colleagues at Department of Finance was to include that filing requirement. The intent of the levy is to identify non-resident owners of housing in Canada. And for the situation you described, the legislation also includes the vacation property exemption, which makes some accommodation for seasonal use properties within a touristic zone. So that would likely be of application potentially to some of these Fort Erie residents.
But again, specifically to the Fort Erie area, you're hearing concerns that it doesn't address the situation. I've had an American who's had that property for a century. For a century. I mean, if you think about it, the Buffalo Canoe Club was established in 1891 in Fort Erie, of all places. The community, it's not an international border that separates us. It's just a river that divides two friends. And so we're finding situations where she's had a house for a century, and 450 meters away, her neighbor is exempt, but she has to pay. So you're still running into situations. My concern is this. I mean, does Revenue Canada even have the ability to implement and enforce such a tax? How would you know, for example, if someone submits or not?
So the role of the Canada Revenue Agency absolutely to is interpret and administer the legislation. And where there is a desire for a substantive change to the legislation itself, then that would have to fall under the purview of the Department of Finance and ultimately parliamentarians.
Again, my situation is we're trying to find a resolution to a problem that I think the government has created on its own. And I don't want to see a situation where it ends up in a reciprocal agreement or a reciprocal tax being placed on Canadian snowbirds. Because if that's the situation, I'll invite you all to come work in my office and take those phone calls from Canadian snowbirds once that happens. But again, we're talking about specific situations. So there's been based on the 115 submissions right now, your offices have been getting calls. There's no look right now by your department to try to rectify the concerns that exist in my community with regards to the UHT.
I think administratively, we can certainly talk about what the agency has been doing, can do going forward to administratively assist those people. There are, of course, close to 15 exemption available. And of course, we have put out a lot of information, and we continue to engage with the communities across Canada, and we continue to put out more information. That's the limit to the administrative part. Right? So what can we do within the confinement of the administration of the legislation? And that has been the focus of our efforts.
Thank you very much. Time is up. I don't know, Mr. Sharon, were you attempting to add some information there?
So in the course of the activities that we undertake for compliance activities, this would include any support we provide taxpayers in their obligations to submit their taxes in due form. We have had opportunities to prepare and present various information sessions, webinars, information that we provide in those fora that provide an ease to be able to submit and meet their tax obligations. But in those sessions, there are Q&A sessions as well where we capture information there, and that influences and informs our future actions in this area. We also are working in partnership to collect more data, more information, so that whenever we are engaging with taxpayers who are seeking to meet their obligations, we have this information, the data in support of our risk-based assessments.
Thank you very much. Mr. McKay, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being. Like Mr. Baldinelli, I too have had long sessions with Mr. Higgins in his office, and I still haven't come to ground as to whether there's a tempest in a teapot or really this is just a tempest. So, moving the scope out, what are the other areas that are proving to be contentious? We know that the Lake Erie area is contentious. Is there any other border areas or even non-border areas where you're hearing some feedback, intemperate or otherwise, from people affected by this tax?
So we do hear from, as I mentioned, industry, and we also hear directly from individuals or corporations trying to fill out, for example, the form. And we have created a dedicated phone line to assist those clients of ours. I cannot provide you a breakdown of where exactly those calls are originating from, but I can tell you that we have received close to 30,000 phone calls on the topic where a variety of questions have been asked going back to January of this year.
I would think to say Nova Scotia would be another area that would have challenges. Is that an area that's receiving complaints about the tax?
As I mentioned, I don't have data broken down by the geographical areas across the country where I can tell you where those calls might be originating from.
It seems to me that the major issue comes when the census metropolitan area is used as the delineation as to what constitutes rural and what constitutes non-rural. Am I correct about that?
We would follow whatever the law says in respect to determining that.
Or I didn't understand what you said.
We would follow whatever the law is written in terms of interpreting those aspects.
I'm not sure how to respond to that answer. It seems distinctly unsatisfactory.
We do have a
It's-
We do have a notice, UHT 14, that talks about how you can determine what area it is and how that's, and in order to determine whether you fall in those areas or not.
So once you're in the area, you're toast.
Again, based on how,
Yeah.
again, based on how it's written and how it's determined, you'd have to follow and apply the rules.
And so if I have a cottage property or something that falls within the consensus or census metropolitan area of Niagara Falls, for instance, even though it's a rural property and even though it's been in my family for 100 years, I'm going to end up having to pay a tax, regardless of whether it's been used regardless of almost how it's been used, except as a recreational property.
Again, if it meets the aspects of the legislation, and in terms of that, you'd have to look at all the facts and how it applies to your property. And if it meets those facts and how we determine that, then you would have to pay or you'd have to disclose at least the property.
And is there any reverse onus on the part of the authorities to yourselves to, in effect, prove the facts of your situation? If I say it's one use and you say it's not, how does that work?
Defer to.
So there is a dispute mechanism, Madam Chair, within the legislation that allows individuals who have disagreement with the position taken by the minister. They can dispute that. We have an objection process. They can certainly also go to the Tax Court of Canada if they're not satisfied with the outcome of the objection. That is in case of a difference in opinion, if that's what I understood. But if a client has already filed a return and they determine that the information they provided on the return did not accurately reflect their situation, if they want to make that change, they can certainly amend the return that has already been filed.
Okay. I'm going to cede the rest of my time, Madam Chair.
35 seconds.
Well, all of 35 seconds, and I can give it to Mr. Shampoo. There we are. There we are.
This is a great committee. Thank you for the compliment, Mr. Shampoo. Okay, you have 6 minutes and 20 seconds.
C'est un cadeau de bienvenue.
That's a welcome gift. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. It's very interesting to hear this discussion. There are so many things that are quite confusing, and I imagine that you probably are tearing out your hair at the department trying to find your way through all of this. Let's try to clarify a few things. I'm going to begin with a critical comment received by Mrs. Pinileki, who is an accountant, member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Alberta. In her brief, she doubts that the CRA knows how many declarations are produced and that most will lead to no tax needing to be paid. She says that it's a waste to have to process this number of tax returns without any tax related to this. Any comments?
My area is responsible for administering the program from a processing perspective. Underused housing tax form that you fill out happens to be one of many what we call information returns that are filed with the agency. A number of these forms are collected to allow agency to gather data to better administer its program. They don't necessarily require some financial impact at the end of the filing. that's why they're called information return. In case of underused housing tax, the estimates were provided by Department of Finance, and I understand that they had a witness here who presented certain numbers. The projection that have been provided to us indicate that close to 10% of the total number of returns filed would result in some sort of financial implication for the individual filing the return.
Il y a un paquet
There are many exemptions, and earlier I was listening to the comments made by my colleagues on the qualification, what is admissible, what is not, what might be exempt, what is a chalet, and also that if some people are exempt from the tax, they have to produce a tax return. Producing a tax return for an entrepreneur leads to costs, constraints, and an extra responsibility. So for farmers who are already extremely busy, they say it costs between $500 and $1,000 to produce this tax return, and I don't think you have anything to contradict that. So why don't we exempt systematically those who are exempted from the tax? Why are they not exempted from producing a return? There's a whole sector that's exempted. It seems quite heavy.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I understand the concern about the filing of the form. By design, the nature of the tax is intended to collect information. As my colleague Adnan referred to, it's one of many information returns that are required. So in this case, there was a policy decision that was taken by colleagues at the Department of Finance in terms of the design and structure of the tax, and part of that is the requirement to file.
Qu'on parle d'exemption, il y a
So when we're talking about exemptions, some people came here to testify, and the mayor of Fort Erie was one, Mr. Riddickop. They had the proposal of excluding those who reside at least 3 months in their secondary residence. Do you see a problem with that proposal? Do you think that there would be consequences in putting in place such an exemption?
It's a policy question. Go ahead.
It's a question CRA can't answer, but would have to be redirected back to the Department of Finance on that, and if there would be any changes required to the legislation.
Okay. Madame Rizzo, vous...
Mrs. Rizzo, you're referring quite often to what is being sent to you as a policy, as legislation, as a regulation. Do you have a mechanism in place when you see some things that are illogical or that you find unnecessarily complicated, or when you come here before the committee and questions are being asked by MPs? Do you have a mechanism that allows you to communicate with, I don't know, the minister or the government and to say, okay, it's difficult to have to deal with this?
And any time when we receive concerns, if there are concerns or questions on the legislation is not clear, we look at it from the interpretative aspects, and if there are concerns, we definitely go back to the Department of Finance. That's our role as part of the CRA, to be able to talk to finance and bring forward these concerns and to address them, and then we leave it in their hands to come back to us to determine where we go or what can be done. So it's part of our role in CRA, whether it's the underused housing tax or not.
Parfait. Dans ce cas-ci.
Great. So in this case, have you made recommendations on the application of this measure?
When the legislation came out, absolutely, we would have reviewed the legislation and we would have provided our comments with regards to it. In terms of any concerns that we would have received, if we felt those were concerns, we would have addressed them. I can't speak to those concerns, or if there were concerns, I can't speak to those.
Well, I'm going to take these 28 seconds. I'm going to give them back to Mr. Cannings. Pay it forward.
Minutes and 16 seconds.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the witnesses for being here. It strikes me there's two issues about this tax that have caused concern among residents. One is the fact that it seems unfair to many how it's applied in terms of the boundaries of the rural districts and the urban districts. And then there's the issue of just the having to file a return when otherwise you wouldn't normally have to. And both, maybe Mr. Khan, both those are baked into the legislation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And how would the CRA have anything to do with notifying people that they may, we have American residents that have holiday homes in Canada, say somebody buys a holiday home, how would they even know they had to pay this tax? And would the CRA have anything to do with that?
So CRA, Madam Chair, does not have, of course, all the information related to people who might be subject to this piece of legislation. At least at the start, we don't have that information. So in terms of communication, we reach out using broader comms tool as opposed to targeted client-specific communication that you might see, for example, from various level of municipal, for example, municipal government may have sent out, very directed communication. When they introduced their pieces of legislation, they were privy to a lot more information than CRA has. So in our case, our focus of communication has been much broader in terms of its nature. It's through Canada.ca, our web portal. We have done a lot of use of social media, for example, to communicate. We have reached out to the industry through CPA Canada, for example, to promote the product that we have put out there for the clients to see.
Okay, I'm kind of out of questions, so I'm going to cede the rest of my time back to Mr. Baldinelli, because it seems to be,
No, I have Mr. App, actually.
well, whoever, it just seems to be their issue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm not sure that I'll be able to extend the generosity. I do have a number of questions. I'll work on it. My understanding is there was a broad agreement in the House that the issue of house pricing in Canada needed to be addressed. I don't think there was argument on any side of the aisle here. However, underutilized housing tax, my own constituency offices, I'm in a rural part of Canada, an ag part of Canada, and I have heard a lot from national ag organizations. So I'm going to start with some specific questions. Did the minister direct the department to focus on rural Canada in addressing housing prices through a UHT?
I believe that would be a question when you refer to the minister. That would be the Minister of Finance that you're referring to, as opposed to the Minister of National Revenue. So that's likely a question better answered by colleagues at Finance Canada.
Have you heard feedback into your offices from rural Canada endorsing this tax and endorsing this approach? You've heard.
I think we've heard from a variety of stakeholders on the issue of the levy itself. Generally speaking, we hear from individuals with respect to issues of how the levy would apply to them.
Right.
Or
Have
not.
you heard from ag accounting is somewhat specialized? I've heard from my offices a number of accounting firms. Has the department experienced any lobbying in the development of this tax in your consultations in 2021? For rural accountants looking for more work and more filing?
The consultations were the purview of Minister of Finance colleagues, so they would have the answers to that question.
Right. I can tell you what I've heard from accounting firms. They are not looking to be selfish here. We're very poorly consulted, and they are looking for ways to simplify the process. Again, I'll come back to the overall arching policy. Is this not to address housing prices? So I'm looking for the reason how the UHT does this in rural Canada.
Again, a question about the broad policy intent of the legislation would be better put to Department of Finance.
I've heard from the national cattle feeders. I've heard from the fruit and vegetable growers of Canada, from a number of provincial organizations regarding particular horticulture, the cattle sector that use a lot of temporary foreign workers. Program requirements require them to have housing on farm as a condition of a federal program. How does addressing, taxing, or exemption filing address the housing price crisis in Canada when it comes to housing for temporary foreign workers?
It's unlikely that that is a question that we've engaged with industry on in terms of how those accommodation units would be dealt with. So that's certainly an issue that we are aware of, yes.
So would it be fair to say that this would be an unintended consequence of a policy directed at a different problem?
Again, I think those questions as to the intent of the legislation would be best placed to Department of Finance.
Okay, so if that is an unintended consequences, would not, on the corporate filing, a simple tick box that indicates I have housing requirements for temporary foreign workers be sufficient to trigger the exemption on a one-time filing? Then maybe if things change, that could be done so. Similarly, I've heard from numerous corporate farms that have either their personal housing of their senior lead employees, or family members that are involved in the enterprise. This is all capturing that. Again, does this address the primary focus of the intent of this legislation? And, sorry.
No, I appreciate the comment and appreciate the information on those situations as well. And that's certainly something we can look at in terms of our administration and how best to address those concerns. So thank you.
Exactly. I mean, I get that it's a broad overarching, but the suggestions that a one-time filing indication on the tax form, would that not both capture the intent of the policy and also exempt the whole rural community from the unintended consequences? I think we're all in favor of the broad policy goals, but I think we're all scratching our heads as the implementation of a tax. And I'm going to go there next. This is also for information gathering. Can you comment on what information you're after? I have heard that this is more to get at the one-time personal residence exemption that has anything to do about housing prices in Canada. Can you comment?
So just a couple of comments. You referred to switching to a one-time declaration. So the legislation is currently based on an annual filing. Just wanted to clarify. Yeah. Oh, no, just wanted to clarify in case there were others paying attention today. And then secondly, the question about the intent and design of the legislation. Again, Department of Finance, but I think if you look at the budget materials at the time it was introduced, there was a focus on vacant or underused housing in Canada and how that might tie into the lack of availability and hence increased pricing for housing in Canada.
Did you say in rural Canada?
No, I said in Canada,
in
generally.
Canada, but in rural Canada. So that leads me, and actually if I can pick up on a question from my colleague, Mr. McKay, on the metropolitan census data. Peely Island exists in my riding, separated by 14 kilometers of water. I put an OPQ in for the department to make the determination whether Peely Island, separated by 14 kilometers of water, was as part of the Windsor-Essex metropolitan census data. And the department refused to interpret their own law. Would that be consistent with your broad policy? Because I'm picking up from Ms. Rizzo's earlier comments that the department would interpret their legislation.
So I'm not familiar with that particular request. I'm sorry, I don't have all the information on that.
Lastly, I know I'm extending my time here. On bear trusts, can you explain how capturing a bear trust, particularly with a father with 4 daughters, helps his daughter buy a house, how that adds to the overall arching policy of addressing housing pricing?
Yeah. Certainly one of the issues we have to work through in the administration of the legislation are the various ownership structures that might be in place. So that is one of the issues we'd be working through in terms of our administration.
Overextended my time.
Thank you very
Anything left,
much,
I'd be glad to see it on.
Mr. Aria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I look at the website where the number of returns filed is provided. As of last week, 29,382,000 returns were filed, and 92.8% of them have been filed electronically. Do you have any information on number of returns that were filed under for UHT?
So, excuse me, as of last week, as of June 15th, we had received about 135,000 return filed under UHT.
135,000 out of 29,382,000. Okay. How much of from the?
I'm sorry. So the number you're referring to are the T1 filing.
Okay.
And the number I provided you with, that's the UHT.
Okay, got it. Can you repeat the number of UHT filings again?
135,000.
135,000. Out of 135,000, how many of them actually owed tax under UHT?
Okay, as you know that the time was extended to, the penalty and interest was waived as a result of an announcement made by CRA on March 27th. Individuals and people impacted have until the end of October 31st to file, to pay if they owe anything without incurring penalties and interest. But effectively what that means is that our clients can still file until that time.
far.
Yeah, so far we have less than 5% of the return file where the amount have been owed.
So less than 5%, approximately 6,000? 6,000 applicants filed. Okay. Now, when this legislation was proposed, I'm sure you would have done the macro study to identify number of units that may come under this after giving all the exemptions. What was that number?
So the number was estimated by Department of Finance, and they estimated that 10% of the overall UHT return file will have money owed.
Okay. 10% of, okay, number of properties, those owners who had to file the UFT, what was the number? Number of people who have filed is 135,000.
So for each property, if it's owned by, for example, co-owner, each individual is required to file a return. The number estimated by the Department of Finance was that anywhere from 355,000 to 420,000 return will be filed this year.
Okay. So now coming back to this 135,000 returns that were filed, what percentage of them was filed by individuals?
So far, this is only based on the 135,000 return file. The number seems to be even, but a little bit geared towards on the individual side. So majority has been filed by the individuals.
Majority, 50%, 60%?
50+%.
Okay, 50%. Out of those individuals who have filed, that includes partnerships, trusts, etc., correct?
That is correct, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Now, coming back to the number of units that filed for this return, 5% of them had to pay UHT. So next year, you will find that number is going to go down, that 135,000, if that is the final number.
So I would again caution that 135,000, Madam Chair, is not the final number because we expect more return to come in.
Okay.
Now,
Quickly, I got limited time. In Fort Erie area, I believe that there are about 900 properties. I think the number I heard is around 160 or 200, 300 may have to file. Is it possible once all the filings are done for you to segregate and identify from which province how many people had to file and how many people actually had to pay the tax? Because my guess is, my speculation is, maybe 150 people may come from Ontario side, and I'm sure United States Representative Higgins will not put his considerable weight behind passing a legislation attacking our snowbirds because 150 people from his district had to file this UHT.
absolutely, Madam President. We'll be able to present data based on the location of the property and also based on whether it was filed by individuals, partnerships, or corporations.
Yes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. Earlier, Mrs. Rizzo, you spoke about the recommendations you made when the bill was tabled. Would it be possible to see what recommendations you made at the time? Could you send this to the committee, please?
But I definitely don't have them with me here. It's something we'd have to go back and take a look at in
Parfait.
terms of what our comments are, and we can get back to the committee on that.
Merci.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. We spoke about the exemption, for example, a cottage, if it's occupied for 28 days during a civil year or calendar year. So what is the mechanism for verification? Are you trusting the word of the person sending the declaration or the return? How do you check if the person spends 28 days? Well, thank you for the question. There should be a process in place through checking for this information. That can include request that a taxpayer would send information to demonstrate that they were present at the cottage during that period. And it can take a different forms of documentation, but we would be open with the taxpayer to have a conversation and to find what are the documents. So it's more or less on good faith. Regardless of the mechanism, I don't see how you can say, well, this person was there for 28 days. I can tell you that I was at a cottage for X number of days, but was it 54 days, 17 days? I mean, I can tell you 28 days because that's what you want to hear, but it will rest on the goodwill of the taxpayer, correct? Oftentimes it does rest on good, transparent communication with the taxpayer. We do have access to other information that can supplement the observations, but it does rest on the good faith of the taxpayer. That's fine. I'll cede my time.
Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Okay. I'm just wondering, this is about CRA administering this tax. Are there any other pieces in the tax law in Canada that you administer that is like this, that you need considerable amount of information from people, whether they live within the boundaries of one of these urban areas or not, whether they own property? There's other things when I'm filling out my taxes, I just come across, do you have $10,000 outside Canada or something? I forget exactly what it is, and you just check a box and move on. Are there any other pieces of tax law like this that you administer that involve this extra work on the part of residents or non-residents that is just gathered for information's sake?
Right. The question you're referring to on the T1 form relates to foreign property, Madam Chair, in excess of $100,000. That's one question. Of course, we have certain declaration and election that taxpayer can make with regard to, for example, their principal residence. There may be other situations, but I'll pass it on to my colleague if they have anything to add.
Don't have anything further in terms of adding that. I mean, my expertise is on the GST side of the house.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's, to make this simpler, whether you could just say, do you own property that is subject to the underused housing tax? Check a box and move on. That might help Canadian taxpayers deal with that. I just wondered if there's any other parts of the tax law that requires a lot more information, even though we've heard 95% or something of people who own an extra house aren't going to be paying this tax. Just trying to make things simpler.
Madam President, there are, of course, exclusions within the form. We can only rely, as far as broader communication is concerned, on the messaging that we put out there for people to first identify whether they're impacted or not. If they are impacted, we have created a form, and that's one of the reasons the form is as long as it is, because it allows our client to make the right determination whether they should be paying the UHT or not. That's the avenue we have taken.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Mr. Carey, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. From what I'm hearing here today, it's like finance came up with this idea based on the ministerial directive, and as Mr. Baldinelli said, they did their consultations in the middle of an election, so there's no surprise that there seems to be some challenges here. I'm a little concerned, though, that some of the answers we're getting today, it's like there should be finance. Finance has already been here, and they're kind of going right hand, left hand. It would be great to have both of you here at the same time, because we would like to see a solution, and there doesn't appear to be one coming very quickly. I do have a number of questions, because the idea of the legislation was good. I think everybody's aware of that. But I think what might be happening, we may end up having a bunch of American friends selling their property, and inadvertently it'll go to Airbnb. So instead of actually being a solution, it's going to add to the problem. So I only have a little bit of time here, but I'd like to know, have you done a cost-benefit analysis on, the actual bottom line of implementing this policy? Is that going to be good? Because we heard the idea of this is, there's gathering data, but there's also to have tax revenue. Have you done a cost-benefit analysis of it? The other question I'd like to ask is, who can stakeholders talk to? And we have a lot of correspondence. People are trying, and they're not getting the answers, or they're getting conflicting answers. So that's the second question. And then the third one, I think you might be underestimating the U.S. situation with our snowbirds. Have you heard, Mr. Khan, about potential retaliatory response to the Americans? There's, according to a 2015 survey by BMO, roughly 500,000 Canadians own property in the state of Florida alone. And this could be problematic for Canadians. So I have some other things to talk about, but maybe if we could address those things. Again, cost benefit, who can stakeholders talk to, and have you heard about possible retaliatory action from the U.S.? Mr. Khan?
And if they could all be addressed in 2 minutes and 41 seconds, we would appreciate it.
If you can give it to us in writing, that'd be great.
Maybe with the cost-benefit analysis. That would be within the domain of Department of Finance. When we're asked to administer a piece of legislation, we do our internal costing and provide that number as part of Treasury Board submission. So that we have certainly done on our side, the estimate on how much would it cost the agency to administer such a program, but I cannot speak to the cost-benefit analysis that might have been done by Department of Finance.
Madam Chair, maybe quickly on question number 2 and around what can taxpayers do to get more information. Of course, our websites are available and quite descriptive, but as mentioned previously, we do have a liaison officer service. 350 organizations have been contacted. They include taxpayer associations, lawyers, municipalities, chambers of commerce, et cetera. As of June 16th, we've had 26 such sessions, and we have another 8 planned by the end of July. So I think the offer is to connect with us, seek more clarification, and we're there to support in terms of their meeting their tax obligations.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I can just add to that as well, we also have a rulings and interpretation service. So if they have very specific fact-oriented questions, they could write into us and we would respond to those. If a ruling could be issued, we will issue. If not, an interpretation of the information will be given.
Possible retaliatory, have you guys looked at that, or?
Certainly aware of the issue in terms of following the situation in the U.S., but it's not something that we could comment on at this time.
Okay, thank you.
45 seconds, is that
45
right? 'Cause
seconds,
we're
but I'd
warm
like
and
to
fuzzy.
get one other member in, and it's 5 to 1.
Well, just real quick, if you've been directed by the minister or finance, the minister's directed finance to fix the problem or come up with something, because we're getting, you may have that there, we're just worried about, we're not getting that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lapointe for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, MP Aria. You talked about the data that was being collected, and unfortunately you can't break it down by geographical area, but can you tell us what's the most common inquiry that you're getting and the most common concern that you're receiving?
So most common inquiries that we receive on our general inquiry line or the line dedicated to businesses is with regards to filing the form itself. How do I answer the following question, this question or that question? Questions about exemptions and question about location, because we have created a tool, as you know, that allow our client to identify where exactly, of course, based on the postal code, their property is located and the tax implication for them. And it works in about 98+% of the cases, but there are those odd situations where individual will call because they couldn't get the right answer from the tool.
One more question before I hand it over. Can you tell us how many people say they owe money, and how much money have you collected?
So as I mentioned, based on the return filed, as of last week, we had less than 5% who actually owed money. The amount owed was just over $7.5 million. And it's based on the number of returns that have been filed thus far. And that number, as I responded, Madam Chair, earlier, was 135,000.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quickly, you said about 6,000 people owed money out of 135,000. So and also you mentioned out of 135,000, about 50% were individuals. So I assume that out of the 6,000 people who had to pay, about 50% are individuals?
I don't have the exact data.
That's okay. I got limited time. I'm not surprised that the questions you're getting is about exemptions and the location thing. When U.S. Representative Higgins was in our committee, I recall that he too was not fully aware of the exemptions that were provided. So because this being the first year, we can expect to have a lot of these questions. So this would get streamlined by next year.
Absolutely. It would take, of course, a little bit longer time to file the return the very first time. But as you file more and more return, unless the information contained in the form substantively changed, it would become a lot easier.
So again, based on the numbers of filings, the number of properties that are owned in the Niagara Lake area, when I do the math, I mean, back of the envelope calculation, it may be around 50, 100 people that may get affected. Obviously, you will provide us the information various region-wise, how many people had to file, etc. So the assumption that this is a major thing that affects the U.S. property owners in Canada is actually wrong in my view. What do you say?
You're entitled to your view. Remember, I cannot speak to that.
The number of people affected, the U.S. Citizens who have been affected by this being low, though the scares that the snowbirds will get affected by competing legislation, I think is also low. Now, coming back to quickly, are you finding any problem in enforcing this tax?
So we haven't really gone to the enforcement phase just yet, Madam President, because as you know, we have until October 31st before individuals have to pay penalty or interest. Yeah.
So one possible solution, I don't know, I'm just thinking aloud here. What if we grandfather the properties owned by individuals for more than 10 years, also be exempted in the next round? I don't know if it's something like that possible, enforceable.
I cannot speak to that.
That would be a consideration that would require a legislative change on the part of Department of Finance, so we'd leave it to them.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to our witness. Realize that you're the folks who have to implement what someone else does. And so it was not easy, but I thank you very much for being here. It's much appreciated. It's additional information. Thank you very much to our analysts. This is the last meeting we're having this session. We're not going to have a meeting on Thursday. And so I just thought I'd make that clear. And thank you to our clerk. I think you did a superb job, Madam Clerk. Thank you very much. So, okay, and to all our folks who made it all work, thank you, especially all of those who came in fresh this morning. We appreciated your help. Meeting adjourned.